Imagine flying over open water when all contact with the mainland is suddenly severed.
It seemed like somebody threw a blanket over my airplane.
I was actually seeing the fabric of time itself.
This is the Bermuda Triangle. For hundreds of years, boats and aeroplanes have vanished in its diabolical geometry. And its mystery continues to confound us today.
It was right there on radar coming in for landing, and the whole plane's gone, everything.
But what exactly is it? A sea of rogue waves? A weather vortex? A mysterious electromagnetic force? Or imagination run wild?
Uh-oh, red alert.
Basically, the Bermuda Triangle, the premise of the whole thing is false.
We plumb the murky depths of the Bermuda Triangle as we attempt to clear up the mystery once and for all. The clear blue water of the Atlantic Ocean seems like the perfect place to kick back and relax. But looks can be very deceiving. Because within paradise there lies a deadly place from which some people believe you may never escape, the Bermuda Triangle. Over the centuries, hundreds of people have ventured here and never returned. Ships have vanished without a trace. Planes have been snatched from clear skies. They did not make distress calls, and no debris was left behind. The Bermuda Triangle covers an area of approximately 1.3 million square kilometers between Florida, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda. It encompasses some of the world's most dangerous water and a treacherous ocean floor that drops from shallow blue waters into a dark trench several kilometers below the surface. There have been many rumors and theories about the triangle's strange disappearances. Sailors and aviators have reported spooky goings-on here for hundreds of years. But it was the disappearance of 5 planes at once that really put the Bermuda Triangle on the map. On the 5th of December 1945, a squadron of 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers was preparing for a routine training mission at Fort Lauderdale Naval Air Station. It was known as Flight 19.
Once you're a Navy pilot, you're supposed to be able to fly any place with a plotting board and a compass and a watch.
Retired aviator David White was a flight instructor that day with Flight 19 team leader Charles Taylor.
He was one of our senior instructors when he was transferred up to Fort Lauderdale.
It was a clear day and the seas were calm. But halfway through the mission, Taylor reported that they were in trouble.
And he said, "My compasses are out." Well, for a compass to go out, it does happen sometimes, but not very often.
The flight controllers tried to talk the men home, but their radio signals kept growing weaker. Soon, no one knew where the men of Flight 19 were headed.
NSO, 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 how do you read me? Over. I receive you very weak. My transmission is getting weaker.
Within hours, all 5 planes, carrying 14 men in all, had vanished.
Duty officer came around, knocked on the door. He said, 5 of our planes are missing. And both of us said, how could this be?
Rescue planes scoured the sea and sky. David White was in one of them.
We searched diligently for several days, found nothing.
But then the triangle worked its deadly magic again.
Radio check, can you read us?
One of those rescue planes, along with its entire crew, also disappeared. After 5 days, the search was abandoned. 6 planes and 27 men had vanished without a trace inside the Bermuda Triangle. It wasn't long before rumors started to fly. How could 6 aeroplanes disappear into thin air? One theory was that a strange electromagnetic force had seized control of their navigation instruments. Others argued that the planes must have been engulfed by a strange and deadly electronic fog, or possibly been abducted by aliens. Soon, people were paying attention to the weird happenings here. John Quasar is one of those people.
I'm not interested in tragedies and accidents. I'm investigating the mysteries, those that went out and should not have vanished.
Quasar has devoted 15 years to studying the mysteries behind the Bermuda Triangle and Flight 19. He's written a book that covers just about every triangle theory, from UFOs to USOs, unidentified submerged objects. Some people believe there are aliens that prefer to travel by sea, cruising in underwater vessels. It may sound unlikely, but one story from 40 years ago does call these USOs to mind. And it's one of the cornerstone cases of the Triangle. One December night in Miami, Dan Burak and Father Patrick Horgan headed out for a short pleasure cruise on the Witchcraft. Not long afterwards, they struck something in the water. Their boat lost power, and at 9 o'clock, Burak called the Coast Guard. He described exactly where the boat was disabled, down to a specific buoy marker. There should have been no immediate danger. The Witchcraft was packed with safety equipment, with plenty of life jackets and extra flotation devices built into the boat. It was supposed to be unsinkable. But when help arrived mere minutes later, the Witchcraft was gone. There was no debris and no bodies. According to Quasar, this is one of the more baffling triangle disappearances. But the grandest of all is the USS Cyclops. This 19,000-ton Navy collier began its journey in 1918. She was an unusual ship, with tall, slim derricks to transport coal. The trip should have taken a few days, but the Cyclops is currently about 90 years overdue. It never issued an SOS and simply vanished without a trace. This ship's disappearance has been called the US Navy's greatest mystery. The fates of the Cyclops, the Witchcraft, and Flight 19 are indeed mysterious. Could there be a common thread?
A disappearance always seems to occur when there's something wrong atmospherically and radios are having trouble.
This would seem difficult to prove, since all the victims appear to have vanished into thin air. But in fact, there's at least one eyewitness who has lived to tell the tale. Carrie Trantham from Key West, Florida, had a terrifying run-in with the Triangle in 1995.
I'm flying along the coastline of the Everglades, and I'm feeling very comfortable. Then all of a sudden, it seemed like somebody threw a blanket over my airplane, and I was in total darkness.
Her cockpit lights started to flash, and her compasses began to spin. Outside her window, she could see nothing except a thick black fog.
My mind was clicking, okay, what do I do next? As a pilot, you're supposed to trust your instruments, but my instruments were so erratic, I couldn't trust them.
All the while, there was a loud buzzing in her ears.
I didn't know what was going on. It happened so fast, and you're just in a life-death situation where you just I didn't want to die. So I tried to get my wings level, not knowing whether I was upside down or right side up.
Could some strange atmospheric phenomenon have been interfering with Carrie's flight? And if so, what was it? Later, Carrie will get back into a plane with us to try and work out what happened that day. The Bermuda Triangle has puzzled observers for years. But if we really want to understand its secrets, the first place we need to look is in the stars. If you look at a compass in Europe, it'll point to the trusty North Star. Centuries of sailors depended on this fact. But if you sail across the Atlantic to North America, you're in for a big surprise. Christopher Columbus certainly was. He'd had a hard enough time convincing his crew that they weren't going to sail off the edge of the Earth. But things got a whole lot more difficult when he reached the Bermuda Triangle, and his compass pointed 6 degrees away from the North Star. And it wasn't just the compass that was behaving abnormally. Weird lights appeared in the night sky on more than one occasion. Stories of Columbus's strange phenomena circulated for hundreds of years. Ships and planes have been vanishing ever since. But it wasn't until the 1970s that people really began to take notice, when Charles Berlitz wrote a book that took the world by storm. Tales of mysterious disappearances made the book a runaway bestseller, but that was just the beginning. As a wave of publicity spread across the world, wild theories began to abound, and scientists who had been looking into the powers of the triangle began to think it might not be the only one out there. Naturalist Ivan Sanderson came up with the idea of vile vortices. He described these as specific areas of ocean characterized by violent sea currents, radical temperature changes, and electromagnetic anomalies. Two of the vilest vortices were the Bermuda Triangle and, on the opposite side of the globe, a place called the Devil's Sea. Just off the coast of Japan, the Devil's Sea is another place supposedly plagued by strange disappearances. It got a lot of attention in the 1950s, when 9 ships vanished within just a few years. Sanderson suggested that the vortices, in particular the Devil's Sea and the Bermuda Triangle, were marked by strange electromagnetic disruptions. Maybe vessels that entered the triangle could trigger these anomalies if they locked into some frequency in the area. Or perhaps there was something going on inside the Earth to cause the oddities, something we could not yet explain. We may find a clue as to what's happening in the triangle's atmosphere from the story of amateur pilot Bruce Gernon. On the 4th of December 1970, Gernon was flying near Bimini when he saw a strange cloud outside his window.
It had silky edges to it. I went ahead and started climbing up, and it happened to be directly in my flight path.
He entered the cloud, and within minutes, his instruments went haywire.
Miami radio. I'm not sure of my position. I'm in some sort of a fog. Can you help me?
Flight controllers couldn't see him on radar. He knew he had to get out by himself. Soon, he realized that the fog was closing in on him. Gernon created this illustration to show what he saw. It appeared that his only escape was a strange U-shaped opening ahead.
So we went ahead and dove down, and then I noticed that the tunnel was getting smaller.
White light flashed all around him, but he wasn't in a thunderstorm.
And the deeper I went in, the more intense these flashes became, and the more rapid they became. I'd never seen lightning like this before.
As Bruce passed through the tunnel, it closed in around his plane.
And then all of a sudden, these strange lines formed all around the airplane, and they were like cracks, and I could see clear blue sky on the other side.
Finally, he escaped the tunnel. Then, he looked back.
And then I watched the tunnel collapse and form like a slit and rotate now in a clockwise direction.
But Gernon wasn't out of the clouds yet, but was now in danger of being enveloped by what he describes as a strange electronic fog.
It was at this point where the fog attached itself to my airplane.
His navigational instruments were still malfunctioning.
Miami radar, requesting radar identification.
Finally, flight controllers spotted him and told him he was near Miami.
Negative, Miami radar. I've got to be at least 80 miles east of Miami.
Then he saw land and realized that Miami radar was right. He was now back in Florida. Bruce believes that the flight only took him 50 minutes when it should have taken 80. He'd lost 30 minutes, somewhere in the triangle. Quasar believes the enigma of the electronic fog may be solved not in the triangle itself, but rather thousands of kilometers north in Vancouver, in the makeshift laboratory of amateur physicist John Hutchison. Hutchison has gained some notoriety because of a radical discovery he claims he's made. He began experimenting with radio waves and high voltages in his apartment some decades ago. In 1979, he claims that he stumbled upon something remarkable, a series of strange phenomena that believers have dubbed the Hutchison effect. Jan Quasar and many other triangle believers think the Hutchison effect can tell us a lot about the Bermuda Triangle. Hutchison believes he's found a way to create an electronic fog here in his laboratory, similar to the fog Bruce Gernon experienced in the Triangle. He claims the electronic fog actually surrounds metallic objects and wreaks havoc with electronic equipment. Unfortunately, the fog doesn't appear every time Hutchison summons it. And it turns out Hutchison never takes notes. He relies a lot on intuition when conjuring the effect. Not surprisingly, more than a few people are skeptical, including Georgetown University physicist James Mattingly.
I don't know what the effect is supposed to be. It's as though anything that happens in John Hutchison's house is the Hutchison effect. And I don't know if this includes John Hutchison walking across the room. Is that a Hutchison effect? I just don't know.
Hutchison is used to critics, but he says he has proof. He's managed to capture the effect on video.
And luckily we have about four instances of it happening with camera equipment when we're doing experimental testing.
Hutchison has also agreed to let us film a live demonstration.
All right, folks. I don't know what's going to happen once I turn this unit on. When I get into the transceivers and that and the other equipments, then there could be a major effect happening there.
If what he says is true, we could be engulfed by an electronic fog. Inside this alcove, hundreds of kilograms of equipment and a foil-lined plastic jar are suspended by chains. Hutchison says the voltage here is unsafe for humans, so the camera crew has to stay back.
How's in the back room?
What's going on back there, Owen?
Okay, good. I'm hoping that we'll get the electronic fog and any other strange, goofy things that happen there too will be great. Any glowing going on in there? Could there be? Okay, stepping up energy.
Although the chains vibrate slightly, the camera doesn't pick up any strange effects, so Hutchison increases the voltage.
All the way, I might add a few extra volts. That sounds healthier, yeah. Oh, how are you doing? Oops, you're doing fine, okay.
Then, the experiment goes up in flames.
Sense something wrong there. Uh-oh, red alert.
A fire in the plastic jar means the show's over. This doesn't mean the effect doesn't exist. It could simply be hard to witness. But this argument doesn't convince Dr. Mattingly.
The one thing that's entirely missing from all of this is any kind of sense of context. There's just no way to know what's supposed to be going on, much less evaluate whether it is going on, and then to try to evaluate what the exact thing is that is underlying this effect.
So what about Hutchison's own videos? They contain 2 full hours of the Hutchison effect, jellied metals, levitating objects, and an electronic fog. If the only real evidence is the video, the best thing we can do is analyze that. Tom Flynn and Joe Nickel are skeptical investigators at the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal.
You could make something like this out of rubber tubing.
They are not convinced by Hutchison's video.
We don't know who made it. We don't know under what conditions. The video itself may be totally ungimmicked, but be a photograph of something fake.
Skeptics may be quick to dismiss it, but one man has experienced it for himself, twice.
Well, the way he explains it, it's like a mist, and it sounds very similar to this fog that I was in. It's kind of like looking at a black and white television set when it's out of focus.
Years after Bruce was trapped in the fog over the Bermuda Triangle, he experienced it again, this time when he and his wife were flying over the Florida Keys.
We were heading north over the Everglades, and when we got over the Everglades, right on the edge of the Everglades, instantly it appeared as if there was fog everywhere over Florida.
Bruce claims this too was an electronic fog, and that it attached itself to his plane.
So I called up the Miami radio, and the Weather Bureau told me that there's no fog reported anywhere in Florida.
Wherever Bruce flew, the fog followed him.
So I had a feeling that if I headed toward the ocean, maybe I could get away from this fog. And it worked.
Could some people possess special powers that actually draw the electronic fog to them?
For some reason, whenever we go flying, we always see strange things. I'm almost thinking, I don't know, it must be our airplane.
Bruce Gernon cannot discount a supernatural significance to his repeated fog experiences. But is there a simple explanation? There's one way we can find out. Pilot Carrie Trantham has agreed to go back into the Triangle to relive her ordeal, this time with an experienced co-pilot at her side. In 1995, Carrie was flying inside the Bermuda Triangle when she had the sensation of someone throwing a blanket over the plane. Her instruments began to malfunction, and in an instant she almost lost control.
It happened so fast, and you're just in a life-death situation. I didn't want to die.
More than 10 years later, Carrie still has no idea what hit her, but she's finally ready to find out. We've asked flight instructor Carol Collins to fly with Carrie and simulate her flight, to try and get to the bottom of what happened that day.
All right, 700 feet, I'm going to start my turnout.
They take off at night. At the same time, Carrie took her traumatic flight.
What was your ammeter showing? Do you recall?
You know what? I didn't even look at my ammeter. I don't even think I was just so panicked.
Right.
I was very panicked, very scared.
Carrie had panicked because she felt as if someone had thrown a blanket over her plane. Carol has an answer for this.
When you are looking at a line of lights on the horizon and you fly near or underneath a cloud, those lights can suddenly disappear and the horizon is now gone. And the sensation of having a blanket thrown over you is an interesting and probably very accurate description of how that feels.
You cannot see the outline of the clouds at night. They just don't show up.
That could be a possibility, that I flew into a cloud.
Once inside the dark cloud, there would be total confusion.
Loss of control is most often attributed to spatial disorientation. It boils down to a pilot's confusion over whether or not they're upright, turning, or even upside down because of conflicting information to the senses.
In addition, a storm was following close on Carrie's heels.
We kind of thought that maybe I was hit by lightning to cause some of the instruments to be so erratic.
Carol believes that Carrie was trapped in bad weather in an anxious state over ominous waters.
One of the big things about flying in the Bermuda Triangle is the fact that you are over open water without any other references, and it is a confusing place to be.
How she responded in that state of mind and in that environment could have been at the root of her experience. But if a psychological fog can be misinterpreted as an electronic fog, what can be made of the work of John Hutchison, who claims he can make the triangle's electronic fog at home? Although he was unable to reproduce it on command, he's got video proof of his Hutchison effect. In the video, bottles levitate, metal jellifies, and an electronic fog forms spontaneously. Triangle believers say that Hutchison's strange effects are hard triangle evidence. But skeptics Tom Flynn and Joe Nickell don't agree.
So here's the 7-Up bottle clip.
And they think they know exactly how it's done.
Goes. It's so peculiar, so unlike what a human cameraman would normally do, that this bottle goes flying away, and the camera doesn't want to follow it.
So the assumption is that it couldn't follow it.
There might have been something up there that you wouldn't want to see.
They suspect that someone was pulling strings. Hutchison claims his experiments come with no strings attached.
We bust their guts laughing, because how are you going to use strings in a full-scale levitation experiment when you have television people around and scientists who do controlled experiments?
But Nickell and Flynn think they can prove it.
The Hutchison video was shot in what appears to be a garage or a basement workroom. It's got a beige concrete floor, and there's stains and cracks, and it's kind of variegated. And the nice thing about that, if you're doing something with filament line, is that kind of background is very easy to lose the line against.
I've rigged this bottle so that I have a control. It's fastened at the bottom, and it's fastened at the top with filament. And this is going to be what we call the puppet effect. Here you can probably see the fish line against my solid colored trousers, and yet if I step away quickly, the line vanishes.
Whenever you're ready, Joe, let's start the wobbling. Okay, stand by to fly it.
Nickell and Flynn have imitated Hutchison's jumping soda bottle with a simple magic trick. But can they imitate the electronic fog?
So now we're going to show how to create an electronic fog effect, as we think it might be done.
What we've done first is to replicate the background light effect, which, as we can see from the original footage, looks round and colorful and with a little highlight in the middle, much like a regular light bulb. So we put a regular colored light bulb on a little holder rig, and we're going to create the semi-metallic fog with some expanded metal. It's actually a scrubber like you'd use in your kitchen. And we're moving it rapidly very close to the lens, which keeps it out of focus. And we're blowing a lot of light into it, so we get some nice highlights onto it. And so we get this effect of a partly lighted, partly opaque, unknown substance in front of the lens, and it acts very, very much like the electronic fog.
This is one way to create the Hutchison effect, and Nickell and Flynn believe that the simplest answer is usually the most likely.
Nothing Mr. Hutchison has done is proof of anything. He's offered no proof. and he needs to demonstrate his effect in front of really credible scientists and under controlled conditions that rule out trickery.
But could this electronic fog be scrambling our compasses and leading us away from the real answer? Could there be another phenomenon, powerful but entirely natural, at the heart of the Bermuda Triangle? It's time to consult mainstream science and apply a bit of common sense to the cases of Cyclops, Flight 19, and the witchcraft. All three stories are tragic, but the case of the witchcraft is particularly confounding. After heading out for a pleasure trip to see the Miami city lights, the boat hit something in the water, then disappeared, just minutes after a calm call for help. But closer examination shows that the mystery of the witchcraft isn't so mysterious after all. In fact, no one knew exactly where the witchcraft was, and the weather was anything but calm. Author Larry Cush dug up the facts surrounding the witchcraft's disappearance.
So they were not at an exact position the way they said they were, which if they had been there, then it would be more mysterious than it really was. Nothing was ever found, and it was stormy that night. They were talking about the frothy waves out there, and they couldn't see in the dark.
But the Coast Guard arrived just 19 minutes after the witchcraft's SOS. So how could the boat have vanished so completely, so fast? No trace was ever found of a boat that was supposedly unsinkable.
My comment to that is, so is the Titanic. Any boat can sink, any airplane can sink.
But the truth is, it's difficult to find someone who's lost at sea, even in favorable conditions. Jim No has been a Coast Guard search and rescue expert in Miami for the last 13 years.
A lot of the area encompassed by the Bermuda Triangle is open ocean. It's hundreds of miles from the nearest land or communications facility. So it would be very possible to not know the precise location that a vessel or a boat or an aircraft went down in.
Added to that is the violent effect of the Gulf Stream, the fast and powerful current that sweeps up from the Caribbean into the North Atlantic. Oceanographer Arthur Mariano has been studying the Gulf Stream and the Bermuda Triangle for years. And he says it can make ships and planes disappear without trace due to something called turbulent dispersion. When a ship or plane goes down, strong winds and currents pummel the vessel and scatter it over several kilometers, sometimes within a matter of minutes. Mariano can show us exactly how it works with a wave tank and some green dye.
Okay, what we're going to do next is inject some dye into the water. When we don't have any winds, we don't have any waves, we don't have any strong currents, over time the dye pretty much stays together.
But when the current is just a bit stronger, the dye moves much faster.
Brian is going to turn up the wind to generate more fully developed seas. As the waves increase more and more, the dispersion will increase.
So what can this tell us about the triangle?
And the combination of the strong waves, strong winds, strong currents, strong eddy activity all lead to very great rates of dispersion in the Bermuda Triangle area. So once you get lost in the Bermuda Triangle, if you're not found in the first few hours, it becomes extremely difficult for somebody to find you.
But can dye really compare to a down 7-ton plane?
That dye is passive. It is just a marker for us to get an indication of the water motion. Well, when debris goes down in the ocean, it too is passive. It's going to be moved by the currents, by the wind, and by the waves.
It seems the disappearing debris isn't quite as enigmatic as some people think. But we still have yet to solve the bigger puzzle. What could have caused these wrecks to begin with? It may be tempting to blame the Bermuda Triangle disappearances on paranormal perpetrators like electronic fog or aliens. But in fact, the weather is a far more likely culprit.
Bermuda Triangle has a collision or convergence of several different types of weather and oceanographic type situations. We have the jet stream coming in from the north, we have the trade winds coming in from the south, and then on the western border we have the Gulf Stream, which is in the water itself.
Quite apart from the challenging currents and winds, the weather here is more than a little erratic.
The Gulf Stream itself can actually create its own weather. It has that particular type of potential.
There's a lot happening in the Bermuda Triangle that no one ever hears about.
But stuff like waterspouts, white squalls, other types of small-scale phenomena that may only occur over a short distance, maybe a couple hundred yards, are never going to be actually seen by anybody or forecasted by anybody. They just kind of pop up all of a sudden, and they disappear. And so if you're not right there in the vicinity, you may never know that they occurred.
A waterspout can smash a ship or plane to smithereens. Hundreds of them are reported in this region each year, and many more may go unreported. Then there are rogue waves, fast-moving 10-story-high walls of water that seem to come out of nowhere and can take on even the biggest ships. Rogue waves are so huge that in the past, few people believed stories about them could be true.
Up until recently, observations of rogue waves were from people at sea. In some cases, these rogue waves were observed by very seasoned captains on U.S. naval ships, and they have reported rogue waves over 100 feet high.
Undersea earthquakes can cause tidal waves. But on the high seas, rogue waves can pack even more of a punch, and with less warning. A strong, relentless wind and a rough, open ocean may be all it takes to lift these troubled waters to dangerous heights. The Bermuda Triangle has all these ingredients, and one more.
Well, in the Bermuda Triangle, with the amount of shipping traffic they have there, there's a much greater probability that a rogue wave, sooner or later, may influence a ship, and in some cases, turn the ship over.
But a rogue wave surely had nothing to do with the fate of Flight 19, when 14 men flew into oblivion. The men of Flight 19 were all experienced pilots who should have been able to accomplish a simple training exercise. But in fact, the team's leader was a novice on this particular flight route.
This was Taylor's second flight out of Fort Lauderdale, probably his first flight out toward the Bahamas.
When they started the flight, the weather off Florida was declared favorable and the sea moderate to rough. An hour into his flight, Taylor reported he was lost.
Over land, but it's broken. I'm sure I'm over the Keys, but I don't know how far down.
He also said his compasses were malfunctioning. Although the team was in the triangle somewhere east of Fort Lauderdale when Taylor called for help, he thought they were much further south in the Florida Keys. Larry Kirsch thinks that Taylor was just confused and didn't trust his compasses.
And this is real typical when a person becomes lost or confused, and then their compass disagrees with what they see. They say their compass has failed.
But what about the 4 other pilots? Were they lost and confused too? Or did everyone's compass fail?
How could this flight be lost in the Bahamas and not see any landmark unless they were just flying in circles, which means all of their compasses had to be haywire?
Radio logs prove that at least one of Taylor's students did know which way to go.
Damn it! If we just fly west, we could get home.
The team was frustrated, but they followed their leader. And then, according to Cush's research, the weather took a turn for the worse.
Pretty soon they were out there in the dark. A storm came in, the ocean got rough.
The airmen stuck it out for a while.
And they just eventually had to run out of gas and they apparently tried to ditch before they ran out of gas.
They also ran out of luck.
I think the storm had come through, and the waves were big, and I think that the planes landed and broke up almost immediately.
In the end, the tragic events of Flight 19 were probably caused by a combination of human error and bad weather. But there's more mystery surrounding this flight. Soon after the squadron disappeared, the search started in earnest.
When the control tower realized that the planes were really missing, they called all of the airports and towers and everything up down the East Coast, alerting them that our planes were missing.
One search plane, a Martin Mariner, was carrying 13 men, and it too vanished. What was going on in the triangle that night? How could 6 planes simply disappear within 24 hours? In the case of the Martin Mariner, the answer is probably simple. This model of plane was often dubbed a flying gas tank because it reeked of gas fumes. Spontaneous explosions were not unheard of. And in fact, the crew of a freighter ship did see a big explosion in the sky shortly after the Mariner took off. Eventually, telltale oil slicks and debris proved that the Martin Mariner did explode. So there may be an answer to the case of Flight 19. But what about the case of Christopher Columbus? His compass also seemed to go haywire when he hit the Bermuda Triangle. But here too there's a simple answer. No compass really points to true north. They all point to magnetic north, a point that is constantly shifting. And since magnetic north is many kilometers from true north, compass readings change as you travel around the globe. Modern navigators know how to compensate for this, but in Columbus's day, no one did. This triangle mystery has also been solved by science. But it's not so easy to explain the fate of the Cyclops. This 150-meter-long ship seemed to vanish into thin air in 1918. After her disappearance, President Woodrow Wilson declared that only God and the sea know where the great ship has gone. She carried a heavy load, more than 4,500 kilograms, and some people suggested that the Cyclops was extremely prone to rolling in waves. A heavy storm could easily have shifted her cargo to one side and tipped her over. The problem was, there weren't any storms. At least, not where everyone thought she was, deep within the Bermuda Triangle. But could she in fact have been somewhere else? In 1968, a Navy diver named Dean Hawes discovered a large, peculiar vessel 110 kilometers east of Norfolk, Virginia.
And he came upon this strange-looking ship with these huge derricks above them.
It was unusual enough to lure Hawes into exploring further. Unfortunately, he ran out of air and was forced to resurface before he could fully investigate. But he never forgot that ship, and years later, when he saw a photo of the Cyclops, he knew it was the same vessel. The ship Hawes saw wasn't actually far from the Cyclops' final destination. When he heard about the possible discovery, Cush started calculating. He figured it would have taken about 6 days for the Cyclops to get to the wreck site. She left Barbados on the 4th of March, so could have sunk on March the 10th.
Well, I did some searching of the weather records. I found that there had been a big storm at the time that affected a lot of the eastern coast. There were some ships out there that suffered some big damage.
Once again, bad weather seems to have been the culprit. A few years later, Navy divers tried to locate the wreck Hawes had described, but they never found it. So it seems the answer to the disappearance of the Cyclops leads us only deeper into mystery. We may never know for certain what happened to the Cyclops, the Witchcraft, and Flight 19. But when pondering these mysteries, there's one more important fact to consider. Statistically speaking, the Bermuda Triangle is no more dangerous than any other ocean route affected by big weather events.
Bad weather is only a problem if you're in it. And bad weather all over the place. However, because of the number of ships out here and the number of planes, the odds increase that sooner or later the probability of a ship or plane being in an area with bad weather increases.
But although we can explain many of the disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle, the case may not be closed.
What's going on in the Bermuda Triangle is a phenomenon that's been going on for centuries, and it has the ability to affect time and space, which makes it so hard to understand.
I think the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle to a lot of people just automatically means there's something strange going on out there, and they overlook what's right in front of their face, which is the ocean is a huge place. It's very rough out there.
As long as people continue to vanish, the myth of the Bermuda Triangle will continue to grow.
The motivation to explain something like Bermuda Triangle is well-intentioned. We all want to find causes for tragedies, but we need to not be following false, fantastic trails that will lead us nowhere.
Is there a sinister force wreaking havoc in the Bermuda Triangle? Or are the region's greatest mysteries simply a case of bad weather and bad luck?